When it comes to iconic fighting game archetypes, one that's up there is the Zoner, being a character who can fight you at a distance and keep you at that distance so they can continue putting on the pressure, or even comboing you from across the room. Or if they do get close to the opponent, they have some attacks that either push themselves or the opponent far away again. While the grappler likes to get close and personal, Zoners want to be as far away as possible, or at least as far away as their weapon can reach. So let's look for the Zoners in fighting games that find the most interesting ways to play the keepaway game. These characters can zone at their opponent with any type of resources. They can use projectiles, long-range weapons, or even their own limbs. As long as they use their main strategies from a distance, they're eligible for this list. And since this is a common archetype in fighting games, one character per series of origin to spread the love, which means I'll likely have to cut some notable characters from this list. Now, let's approach the top 10 Zoners in fighting games. Number 10, General Zod in Injustice. The first Injustice game had a lot of interesting Zoners. About a quarter of the roster could effectively zone, and all with interesting techniques. Deathstroke was your standard pew-pew gun guy, Zatanna had magical setups and a mode that allowed her to fire out magic more quickly when she puts on her hat, Sinestro could do full-screen combos with his various constructs, Cyborg had one of the fastest projectiles in the game with a zipline, Raven had a demon mode that gave her teleports and full-screen combo potential, and Martian Manhunter was probably the best character in the game with his mind projectiles and stretchy limbs. But of all the characters who could play the distance game, Zod was probably the one who I felt had the most fun flavor to his zoning, and he was high on the competitive tier list to boot. His zoning used a combination of alien weaponry, Kryptonian powers, and a little buddy. Since he was a downloadable character, he wasn't in the story mode, so they just threw in the kitchen sink of Zod references from over the years to make his character. The main reason he was included in the game was as a tie-in with the Man of Steel movie out at the time where Zod was the main villain, but he more felt like a reference to the 1970s Superman movie Zod, along with just being his own version of the character for the game. I don't know if his laser guns are any type of comic reference, but they're definitely good at zoning. The big one fires an energy ball that can go slow or fast, and can be fired in the air, so it's versatile at catching an opponent trying to get in on Zod. If it connects, it will bounce the opponent in the air, and then you can follow up with another one of his special moves that leaves the opponent far away to keep up the zoning. One of those follow-ups can be his fastest projectile, his small laser gun, which fires a quick mini shot and is good for catching the opponent off guard for a full screen surprise. His last major projectile is his eye laser, which aims for the feet. While it's a weak attack on its own, spend some meter to enhance it, and it pushes the opponent back to create some distance for your zoning game, or allows you to follow up with one of your special attacks to throw the opponent back even more. Really, enhancing Zod's moves when you get the chance is the best way to go. You can enhance his other lasers to create more blasts to make his zoning stronger. He also has a couple of other special moves that rush in to hit the opponent if they get a little too close for comfort, with the enhanced version of each of them sending them further back. My favorite is the move that traps the opponent in the Phantom Zone for a second. Speaking of Phantom Zone, his special trait that helps him keep up the long game is he can summon a monster from the Phantom Zone that always appears behind the opponent and follows them until a timer runs out, or the game glitches and they never go away T-posing for dominance, to which I would just say restart the match. The monster buddy can simply hit the opponent to make approaching Zod even harder, or bite down on them to hold them in place so Zod can combo them. And then after the combo, probably more zoning.
I win. I always win.
Number 9, Mayuri Kasuga from Arcana Heart. What I like about Mayuri's playstyle is how different she is up close compared to how she is from a distance. Up close, she's pretty weak, with her attacks being slow and short range, but when she manages to run away for a bit, then you're in her domain. She's got plenty of ranged attacks and interesting projectiles relating back to her profession. She's a priestess who can exorcise demons and runs a shrine with her 3 sisters. She leads them all in rituals rituals, and in any missions that expel dark energy, so those aspects make it into her zoning techniques. And I mean all of those aspects, not just weapons or spells that she uses. She fights with her sisters as projectiles. Her main weapon is her top on a string, which can act as a projectile or as a long-range grab with the string. If she manages to bring the opponent in close with the string, then she can get in some combos before going back to her zoning distance. When zoning, I love how she can just throw out her sisters to disrupt the opponent. They come in at all angles. They can be ground projectiles, a dive kick from a distance, and my favorite, the sister that flies in at an angle on an origami crane. There's literally so much personality in all her attacks. And let's not forget her super moves, which help her keep up the zoning pressure, like giving her a bow and arrow, or having her sisters put in even more work. I love how when Mayuri is at max power, it's when the whole family comes together. Number 8. Cetrion from Mortal Kombat. Similar to Mortal Kombat's grappler situation, they never really had a dedicated zoner until their more modern games. All their characters in the older games had projectiles, but every character's main gameplay strategy was to do combos close up and throw out special moves when relevant. But once the series entered the Mortal Kombat 2011 era, zoning became a more viable option for some characters. Though with the variation system starting in Mortal Kombat X, many characters didn't specialize in zoning. It was just an option. No character was a dedicated zoner per se. By that, I mean characters like Jade, Kitana, Liu Kang, and Kenshi could all be played as zoners with certain variations, but they could also be played as rushdown, setup, or even anti-zoning characters with other variations. They were not locked into only zoning with all of their variations. So for this entry, I wanted to pick the character who was more or less designed as a zoner no matter which variation you picked, Cetrion in Mortal Kombat 11. Not only does zoning fit her intended playstyle, but it fits her lore on why she would fight her opponent from a distance. Like with the other characters in the series who can zone, they're trained fighters who aren't afraid to go hand to hand, but with Cetrion, she's a god who can control the elements of nature, so she has no need to touch a mortal in combat. She can just have the earth fight for her. Cetrion's backstory is she's the goddess of virtue, but she went rogue when her brother, the god of death Shinnok, was incapacitated by Raiden, causing the balance of the universe to be disrupted. Also, her mother, Kronika, the Titan of Time, was planning on resetting the timeline no matter what, so it kind of forces Cetrion to play villain. Since she's a god, nothing really hurts her, it just delays her, so characters that can match strength with her in canon usually have some sort of godly boost, but because we have to deal with balance in a fighting game, everyone can technically fight her. Though it doesn't matter who her opponent is, since in the end, they're all gonna get rocks thrown at them. The rock is her main tool. She can throw it at you, it hits hard, she can delay throwing it to play some mind games with the opponent from across the stage. It's versatile. We love the rock here. The rocks can also act as a projectile shield, just in case your opponent tries to get cute and counter zone you. But that's not all of her earthly powers. If you're grounded, she'll summon some vines to pull you down, or she can quake the earth to stop you in your tracks, and if you manage to avoid all of that, she's got some diagonal fire beams. To extinguish that fire, she can summon some water from below the opponent, and then freeze them to give her a chance to create more distance or even combo. Add some wind in there to get in as many elements of nature as you can handle, and you have one strong zoning game.
Cetrion wins.
Number 7. Songmina from Soul Calibur. When fighting games on a 3D plane come to mind, zoning is not as prominent, with characters being able to sidestep due to the 3D plane versus the 2D plane in every other fighting game I've discussed so far. Traditional zoning is usually not seen. There's still plenty of mind games in preparation to make from a distance in these types of games, but you generally want to get in quickly and do all your combos close and personal. However, in weapon-based combos, combat, a longer weapon can cover more range in 360 degrees, meaning a zoner may have a home. So let's look at Soul Calibur, specifically the original long weapon user in the series, Seongmina. She's been in the series since the first game, Soul Edge, aka Soul Blade. It's kinda confusing since this was the only main series game not called Soul Calibur, so the first Soul Calibur game was actually the second in the series. But the point is, Seongmina's been here from the start, and she's ready to fight you from a distance with her naginata. She trained with her father, but when her father forbids her from joining the military and tried to rope her into an arranged marriage, she ran off in attempts to prove herself as an individual who could make her own decisions and show that she was a capable fighter. Her goal, like most people in this series, was to find the wicked sword Soul Edge, since she thought it was the sword of salvation and would be a feat of strength. She eventually learned it wasn't a good thing to pursue, and instead shifted her eyes towards the Sword of Order Soul Calibur. But even so, it was more about the journey, not the destination for Seongmina, because the journey is where she got to hone her zoning-based weapon skills. At the most basic level, Seongmina can keep her distance by poking and sweeping with her weapon. Her overhead attacks cover a long range, so the naginata is perfect for all 360 degrees. An unguarded opponent will have trouble reaching her when they're a full weapon length away, but Seongmina still has to get creative since there are plenty of holes in her strategy if she's not careful. When launching or slashing her opponent, many of the attacks leave them pushed back, giving Seongmina a chance to breathe and get ready to poke from a distance again. A regular combo with Seongmina can juggle or push the opponent further back with each hit, so by the end of it, they could be up to half screen away, perfect range for Seongmina's zoning. She can also create some space on her own, since Seongmina has some attack strings that give her a little runaway move where she retreats a bit. I like this maneuver because she keeps her weapon out while she's doing it, like, yeah, you want a piece of this? Come and get me. Though my favorite attacks are when Seongmina extends her body as far as possible so you can get the maximum distance with her weapon and the opponent just goes flying back. Seongmina shows us that in a world of short to mid-range sword fighters, you don't always have to go face to face if you just take the longest weapon.
You win!
That's what you get for not paying attention.
Number 6. Morrigan in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I was an avid fan of competitive Marvel vs. Capcom 3 from 2011 to around 2016, and if there was one character synonymous with zoning in that game's tournament play, it was the crossover darling herself, Morrigan. Morrigan in her game of origin Darkstalkers, though, was not a zoner. She was just a balanced character being a jack-of-all-trades of sorts with an air glide, but her design was so popular that Capcom just kept putting her in crossover games, to a point where she became more well known for being that girl with bats in her hair in all the Capcom games, rather than being a Darkstalkers character. Capcom just kind of forgets about Darkstalkers, and then remembers them, and then forgets them again, and then remembers them again. And quite literally, they were just putting Morrigan in other games, since they just used the same sprite from Darkstalkers copy-pasted into whichever game Morrigan was in, with certain visual effects adjusted for the game. By the 2000s, that sprite was looking pretty out of place. But finally, after a hiatus of popular Capcom crossovers, Morrigan moved into the realm of 3D models with Tatsunoko vs. Capcom and Marvel vs. Capcom 3. While most of her moves were properly translated into the modern game, the mechanics of Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 turned this jack-of-all-trades style character into a busted zoner. I don't know if this was the developer's intention, but Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is full of a bunch of broken stuff, and that's why we love it. Most characters can do infinite combos, but Morrigan can turn the full screen into a bullet hell, and she doesn't need a bunch of tools to help her zone. She just needs 2 words: Soul Fist. This is her main projectile, and the ultimate tool of destruction. I'll do my best to emulate how Morrigan zoning worked in the B-roll, but forgive me, I'm not very experienced at it. I was merely a Tron player, so I just wanted to smash with my robot fists, not zone. To start it off, you do a Soul Fist, go into her flight mode, immediately Soul Fist after that, cancel flight, and then continue Soul Fisting. Then of course you can mix in different angles, different speeds, advanced versions can start start it off in the air, there's plenty of ways to make it a full-screen Soul Fist party. But let's kick it up a notch. What makes the zoning truly deadly is you can pair it with her Astral Vision super move, which creates a mirror image copy of Morgan to do the same moves as her on the opposite side of the screen for a limited period of time. So now you have to deal with a flurry of projectiles in all directions as you hear the choir of Morgan going, Soul, Soul, Soul Fist. She also has a slower Soul Fist that drains her opponent's meter and gives it to her. So if you mix that in with the rest of her zoning, not only are you bouncing around your opponent, but they're losing meter in the process that goes into her making astral clones. Add in some character assists that create even more projectiles, shout out to Dr. Doom's hidden missiles, and you got yourself full lockdown from a distance. Also, I know I said one character per series of origin in the intro, and this is not Morgan's origin series, but since there are no Darkstalkers characters on this list, and no characters that originated in the Marvel vs. Capcom series on this list either, I thought it would be fine to bend the rules a bit for our succubus queen.
KO! You win!
Is that all you got?
Number 5, New 13 from BlazBlue. BlazBlue has a long and winding story with a bunch of dimension hopping, and New 13 is right in the middle of it. She's a robot cyborg woman who has a mystical weapon and is basically a living tool of war. The villains change ownership of her from time to time, so New 13's role has fluctuated, but once she got to start being herself and not controlled by someone evil, she became more personable. She also got replaced on the roster with a rebuilt version of herself, Lambda 11, who basically did the same thing, but once BlazBlue Central Fiction came out, they did an Everyone Is Here style roster and just put both of them on it, so I'll give this entry to New 13 since she was on the original BlazBlue roster, representing the zoner from the start. She's all about flying sword projectiles, commanding them low, high, in front, and behind her opponents to make sure they can't even take a step without having an obstacle. But forget about these being a single obstacle. If you get hit by one, it opens you up for being bounced around by a bunch of other swords into a full combo. And during all of this, New 13 can just chill on the other side of the stage as she commands her swords. And hey, she's got a grounded saw blade for those pesky opponents blocking high. The swords behind her also put in work, acting as good mid-range tools to push the opponent back if they get too close. Since she can arc them, they work as a great anti-air, and if she sees an opening close up, she can dash in or teleport in with her high speed and hit the opponent around for a bit, ending the combo by knocking them back to set up an array of energy swords again. Enjoy dodging! Number 4, Athena from the King of Fighters. Athena is a character capable of fighting you hand-to-hand, both in canon and with the actual game mechanics, but she's just so much better at zoning. She's one of a few young warriors with psychic powers, and trains with the martial arts master Chin Gensai, who knows the secrets of how to help the team control their powers. Since he's good at traditional martial arts, Athena picks up some physical fighting skills, but when she's at her A-game, it's all psychic energy, which he partially inherited as a descendant of goddess warrior Athena, and technically it's called Psycho Energy, no relation, but regardless of what the name is, you can just look at it as pink energy that keeps the opponents away. Her most basic attack is her Psycho Ball, which is just an orb of pink energy that's fast. She can also adjust the speed of it, and with how fast she recovers after firing it, Psycho Ball is the go-to move when you want to get aggressive from a distance. Making sure there's distance between the opponent and her is easy. She's got a good toolbox of moves for that. Her Psycho Teleport turns her into pure pink energy to quickly dash forwards or backwards. It's great to just use it to head on back and then keep on throwing that Psycho energy. Her Psycho Sword is a great close-up attack that sends the opponent far back enough where she can set up more zoning tactics afterwards, or take a second to teleport away while they're getting up. She also has a dive kick with the Psycho energy that helps create some distance on the knockback. attack, and if you try to match wits with her in the zoning game, she's got a reflector that counters all projectiles right back at you. Her most notable super move is her Shining Crystal, where she just surrounds herself with energy and it can do whatever it wants to fit the situation. It works as a good get-off-me tool, it can act as a shield to deter opponents from approaching her, it can even just create more projectiles to improve her already great distance game. And since she's so fast, her runaway game can work the opposite way, where she can get in quick if she sees an opening and do some pressure or combo strings. Athena can have the best of both worlds when she has plenty of speed and psychic energy to spare. Number 3, Dalsim from Street Fighter. Looking at Street Fighter 2's original roster, two characters fit the zoning style, Guile and Dalsim. Both have different methods, where Guile is designed for knocking the opponent back and proceeding to sonic booming, while Dalsim is more about running away and proceeding to stretch at the opponent. While both are great, Dalsim's attacks feel like they embody the zoner a bit more. Also, zoning goes more with Dalsim's personality. He's a peaceful man who doesn't want to fight. His only reasons for joining the various tournaments were to raise money to help his village during times of crisis, or because something bigger was threatening the peace of the universe. So it makes sense that he wants to keep his opponents a good distance from himself to stay as far away from the conflict as possible. He aims to never hurt his opponent more than necessary, so he's mastered fighting from a distance. His two methods of fighting are fire and limbs. He can stretch his limbs full screen to keep the opponent at bay. For the most part, these are just his general melee attacks, so he doesn't have special names for them. He's just moving his body to fit the situation. He can go low, he can anti-air, he can even do it in the air. He also has a really slow diagonal dive. Not sure if this is zoning per se, but he can do it. His other major tool is fire, and he can produce a lot of it. Did he get these powers from his yoga training? Are they from a god? Is it just from something he ate? Answer, all of the above. It just depends when his bio was written. It's gotten retconned. They keep on changing that element of his backstory, so all you have to know is this man's a pyromancer. His most basic projectile is Yoga Fire, which is just a little flame that floats horizontally. How fast it moves and how quickly it fizzles out depends on your button command, but if you mix in the different speeds, you can keep up the long game. If your opponent manages to dodge everything and get on in, no biggie. Dalsim has the attack Yoga Flame, which is a stationary flame that he spits out to knock the opponent far away, so now you can go back to fighting at a distance, unless of course they block your Yoga Flame and now you're stuck in close quarters with the opponent. Don't worry though, Dalsim has a backup escape plan, his Yoga Teleport. You know, it's a teleport. While it's slow to start up, using it at just the right time can put you back at full screen to make your opponent's pursuit of you even more challenging. And if you want the final boss of Dalsim zoning, look no further than his Great Ball of Fire, which has gone by a few names. It's what you'd expect from a big fireball. If the small fire was sufficient zoning for you, then you can assume that this is even better. Just pick how fast you want it to go and have fun pestering your opponent while they try to avoid it.
Catastrophe!
Number 2, Peacock from Skullgirls. Peacock feels like the culmination of zoning in fighting games. I've said this before about Skullgirls, but the game is partially an homage to the history of fighting games. It took 2 decades of seeing what worked and what didn't for projectile-based zoning, and it infused all of that into Peacock. Peacock is a full-screen zoner because she has projectiles for all angles. You of course have her triple shot forward as her go-to move, but she has plenty more projectiles to cover her bases. Her living bombs named George find plenty of ways to make the opponent hold up for a second. If they want to go airborne, they can fly a plane. If your opponent has your other projectiles timed out, you can mix in some slower walking Georges to mess up their timing. And George can drive a car that activates behind Peacock, so if your opponent thinks they've avoided all your projectiles by jumping behind you, nope, they haven't. In addition, she has a much bigger bomb named Lenny. yes, of Mice and Men reference, who just sits on the stage waiting to go boom, putting even more pressure on your opponent to get out of there. Her gun also has more options than the triple straight shot. It can shoot out short-range sharp objects that send the opponent flying back or just put them in a stagger state, just in case they get too close, so you can hit them back if they're close up and then continue with the full screen hullabaloo. So she's got the horizontal zoning game locked down, she's all set diagonally, she even has options for behind her, but what about her vertical projectile game? Of course she has you covered there. She has an attack called Shadow of Impending Doom, where a projectile falls vertically, either around the opponent or tracking them depending on how you input the move, and the longer you hold down the attack, the bigger the projectile gets. It randomly generates which item you get too, so you might get mixed in bonus effects. You have traditional things like anvils or 2-ton weights, but I'm sure everyone wants me to mention one of her random large items is Dio's Road Roller from JoJo's. And if she gets into a sticky situation, she can get out of there with her teleport, where she creates a hole in the ground. Or if she sees an opening for close-up damage, she can teleport on in, do a combo, and then put the opponent full screen on her terms. You might notice a Looney Tunes vibe with her weapons, and of course, that's intentional. She's an avid watcher of those types of cartoons, which has affected her playstyle. She has an in-universe scientific weapon hooked up to her related to this, which essentially saved her life after being an abused orphan. The weapons, called Argus System and Avery Unit, allow her to warp reality and create whatever she wants to, so with all of her widespread powers, she chooses to create a bunch of goofy guys. But you know what? It works out for her. There are more extensive story elements to it, but what you need to know regarding her zoning is all of her long-distance attacks are created by her willpower with the help of science. Zoners are popular, so let's speed through some honorable mentions, and to save some time, any zoners that I mentioned in other entries that weren't the main entry, like Guile, Martian Manhunter, or Lambda 11, count as honorable mentions and won't need to be mentioned here as well. Basara from Samurai Showdown. He fights with a bladed weapon on a chain, the deadliest of yo-yos. I know it's not a yo-yo. Axel from Guilty Gear. Guilty Gear has a lot of characters that can zone, but they also feel like they fit other playstyles, so I had trouble picking one. Axel fits the zoner playstyle the best with his chain in my opinion, and he's been with the series since the beginning, so I'm choosing him. Though Venom was a close second, and I do play Dizzy like a zoner even though I should do more with her. Samus and Dark Samus in Super Smash Bros. Smash Bros is a game where I don't usually think of zoning based on the nature of the game, but the Samuses have lasers, missiles, and a long-range grab, so I trust them to rep the zoner the best in the series. Radic in PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. As much as people forget about this game, Radic was a very interesting zoner since everything he did was meant for long-range combat. Even his one main close-up attack pushes the opponent many meters back so he can keep on using his sniper rifle from a distance. Shenko from Darkstalkers. Darkstalkers doesn't really have a zoner, especially not Morgan in this series, but I generally would play Shenko as one, so she feels the best suited. She has long-range pokes, a gong that counters other projectiles, and her random item toss, where she pulls who knows what out of her sleeve and throws it at the opponent. And Dormammu and Arthur in Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I was considering either of these guys for the Marvel vs. Capcom spot, but the Soul Fist was just too strong in my mind. I like the style of Arthur's weapons more, but Dormammu's zoning tools are pretty overwhelming, so it's hard to argue against this man with a flaming head.
Player 1 wins.
For this pick, I went with the zoner that felt the most chaotic. It just felt right. Number 1, Hilda from Under Night in Birth. Hilda is one of the leaders of Amnesia, an organization that wants to expand the realm that powers up people like her and the demons around her. The demons are called Voids, and the people who gained power from the demons are called In-Birth. Hilda is an In-Birth, and she's one of the most powerful of them that we know. She says a lot of words about her plan, but it's mostly in terms terms that only she understands, so she's sort of doing a take over the world thing, but she's very vague about her ultimate goal. The end goal seems to be to gain more power to transcend the ranking of an in-birth. She wants to feed the darkness, but it doesn't seem like she wants to willingly harm anyone. However, if the world's in trouble because of her actions, she won't care. She's deceivingly evil to me, since she doesn't seem like that bad of a lady. She's blunt when she says she'll mow down anyone who gets in the way of her plans, but if you're not, she'll let you do your own thing. But since she's the final boss, who you can still play as, every character is destined to fight her, and it's zoning galore against Hilda. She has no interest in touching you with her hands. She uses her in-birth powers to summon blades on top of blades on top of, you guessed it, chairs. I mean blades. That being said, she can use the dark energy to sit on as if it was a chair whenever she wants to look arrogant, and that's whenever she crouches, so she looks like she's always better than you. And while I say blades, it's more darkness energy that she shapes to be pointy. Most of her normal attacks just form these blade-like things that attack the opponent in all directions from across the screen, and it really is any direction. She has spikes that can come out of the ground, and she can form shapes that take up half the screen, and then she can spin to win with those shapes. She can even charge up these attacks to make them last on the screen even longer. These attacks chain together, so she's putting on pressure or doing some mix-ups from anywhere on the stage. One wrong move by the opponent, and Hilda can bounce them around from spike to spike for a full combo before they even get close to her. She turns the field into a full-on obstacle course. When she's distancing herself even more than usual, she can throw them out as a projectile, and you get a one-way trip to the other side of the stage. She can also make it rain darkness with her ball of energy that just sprays out downwards projectiles to make her full screen pressure that much more impossible to deal with. And then when she's done with that energy ball, she can just slam it down on you. With such overwhelming projectiles, her main weakness is she doesn't have many tools for up close if your opponent manages to avoid everything. I like that one of her non-projectile normal moves is just this little kick. That's the perfect visualization of how weak she is up close. But as a quick escape plan, she still has a teleport. Regardless, with her full screen projectiles capable of juggling you into oblivion as she arrogantly watches you struggle, Hilda laughs her way to the top of this list. Now, what did you think? Were all these characters good at the long game, or did some of them fall short? With such a prolific archetype, I likely missed some of your favorites, so let me know your favorite zoners in fighting games in the comments, whether I discussed them or not. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.